All right, everybody, in today's video, we are going to do our third lesson in processing, and I'm going to teach you how to build this thing over here. So what we've done so far is we've started to use some keyboard inputs to be able to have a circle kind of track around with a mouse. We're going to use some keyboard inputs maybe to change the color. In this video, we're going to walk through how to do something like this, where it's totally working hands-free. It's just like an animated loop that's causing this thing to drop down and reset. I think along the way, we'll learn about using like p-vectors, learn about using some loops, and doing some other global variable stuff, which is all really important for us. So let's get started with the code. All right, so we'll start here. I have the basic default template for a class, for a processing class here. I want to highlight some things in here. All this stuff should be pretty common. I have this other stuff. You don't need to worry about this. That's just something I'm going to use in my code. I'm just storing some code in there that I'll use later. But you should have these four methods. The main method, settings, setup, draw. In the main method, you should be calling this papplet and then passing in the name of our class, which is app. In here, this is the size that I showed. I have a very large monitor that I'm working with right now, so I'm just using up as much space as I can to make it like visual. But you can adjust these numbers based on yours. Pretty typical values for these are like 800 and 600, but mine's a little bit larger. All right, so let's see. What do I want to have here? I just want to have so I want to have that circle that appears on the screen and kind of moves down. So, I mean, obviously what I'm going to have to do in here, I'm definitely going to have to do an ellipse. And then I'm going to put in some values in here. I'm going to set the height, and I'm just going to say these always are, I'll say 100 for my width, 100 for my height, so I get that nice circle. But I need to think about my X's and my Y's. Also, what I want to do before, because if you recall from last time, if we want to have a single ball appear on the screen, we need to always reset the background, because that's just going to kind of clear out the canvas and create a fresh background. So we have one ball, background, another ball, background, another ball, and it gives the illusion of motion when really you're just drawing a bunch of balls on the screen. So I'm going to do this first. Okay, now what I need to have in here is I need to have a value. I need to have an X and Y value that is going to kind of change over time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to need to say, I'm just going to call this my X and Y values. We'll do that. Okay, now the tricky part about this is that I want the values to, this thing is constantly looping, and I want to kind of save these values somewhere else, so that way I can call them in draw, maybe update them in draw, but I don't want them to get erased. If I just do something like this, if I say int x is equal to 100, just a random number, int y is equal to, let's say 20, because I want it to be near the top, well, that means every time this loop gets called, I'm going to reset x to be 100 and y to be 20. And that's not going to cause any motion in my ball. So I need something where it's going to be held somewhere else and then called inside here. And so what we can do, we're going to get into a little bit higher level stuff here. I'm going to declare these variables out here. So they are outside of any method. The reason that we declare this outside of here is that variables belong only to the method that they're created in. So if I create these variables inside of, say, the main method, or maybe say settings, I won't have access to them in any other method. You can see right here, it's saying x cannot be resolved to a variable. That's because this one, I want to try and just do my format document, because these variables only exist within these two brackets. They don't exist anywhere else. If, however, I move these outside of any brackets, kind of inside this app, maybe these two brackets, the brackets for the entire class, if I put them there, they're going to be visible inside of all of these other classes. So I might explain that a little bit more. Okay, so the way that I think about this is in terms of boxes. We have our methods are kind of like boxes, or they're often called like blocks. So here's what we have. We have the first block or box that we have is our class box. That's like our file. Everything in our file is inside of this box. And so if we look back to our code, that kind of outer box is going to be our app class. It's like the entire file. So let's call that app up here. Inside of that, we have a few other boxes. We have each method, and we can see this kind of represented as these two brackets here. Inside of this, we have other methods, like we have the main method, the settings method. So I think about that as being a statement, a box like this. So I'll draw a couple just to save some time. We'll call this main. We can call this, I'll say settings. And then I'll call this draw. So any variables that are declared within method only exist within this box. They are not visible to other boxes. However, they are visible to any, if I declare them with a box and there are other boxes within that box, they're visible across all those boxes. So another further example of this is like, so if we do say something in draw, we want to have like an if statement. So we have an if, and I'm not going to say what that is, if something happens. That is also its own box. So if we declare a variable in here like int size, this variable only exists inside this box. It can't be called inside the draw. It definitely can't be called an app, and it definitely can't be called in any of these other methods. It only is visible inside of this box. If I made a variable like here inside of draw, if I make a variable called like int shape, I don't know why I have int as a shape, but let's just assume I did. This variable would be visible inside of the if statement because, you know, the if statement is inside of the draw box, but the variable shape would not be visible in settings, main, or across the entire app. So it's a little bit tricky to begin with, but there's some very straightforward rules. A variable declared within a box is only visible in that box or in any kind of like sub boxes, if that makes sense. So when we go back to our code, what we're doing is we're setting a variable up here called int x, int y, and these are visible across the entire method. They stay persistent. They persist across all of the methods. If we change them in here, we can like update these values and they will persist and they will kind of be available across all of our methods. So let's go back in to see this in action. So I'm going to make these variables x and y appear. I have them in here. I'm calling them in here. Let's just proof of concept that this works. Let's make sure I'm not running anything else. Let's try and run this. And we're seeing great. So I do have a circle in here, but it's sticking in one spot. Maybe I'm going to make these values a little bit larger. I just want to move it over a little bit. Let's say that's 800 for me. So now we get that circle over here. Oof, that's not good. Oh, I messed up that should be my x value, should be 800. Let's change that again. Okay, good. Now we have it kind of in the center. All right, now how do we get this thing to move? Right now what we're doing, even though it doesn't look like it, we are drawing this thing, I think it's about 30 times a second. We are drawing the circle, erasing the background, drawing the circle, erasing the background, constantly 30 times a second. If I add in something into here, I could say I want to increase, let's see, I want to have the y go down. So I really need to mess with this y value. And remember, if you think at the top of the screen, y is 0, and as we go down, it's going to increase in value. So we could say y plus equals, let's say 5. So that means every time we do the loop, the value of y is going to increase by 5. Let's see what the impact that has on our code. There we go. We're going to get the ball to drop. Okay. If we wanted to speed that up, we could change this to, let's say 50. It's going to drop way off the screen. If we want to slow it down, we could set it to 1. That's going to go a lot slower. Because again, it's moving 1 pixel every loop, and the loop's happening about 30 times a second, so it's moving about 30 pixels every second, roughly. Okay. So that's pretty close to where we started the video off. The big difference is that we are having this thing, it's dropping. I really want it to kind of reappear back on the top. And I'll do some other stuff about maybe having it bounce later. Maybe I'll do that in a separate video. What we need to do here is, there's no magic here. We just need to trick the computer into doing what we want. If the y value gets all the way down, we just want to kind of reset it back to be 0. So I'm going to say if y, I'm going to say greater than, it has to be the y of my screen is about 1,000. So I'm going to say if the y value is greater than 1,000, y is going to be equal to 0. So if we run this, so just try and increase it by 5, but hey, if you ever get bigger than 1,000, reset it back to 0. So if we run this code, see everything dropping, hits the bottom, goes back to the top. Now, if you got a really close eye, you'll notice it's not really going all the way off the screen. That's because our XY coordinates are actually right in the center of the circle. So what we need to do is, so it's flipping back to the top when this XY hits the middle, like then when the center hits the bottom. If I really want to get it so when it totally goes off the screen, it resets, I could do something like this. Let's say Y would have to be greater than, well, it has to be a little bit more. So I'm going to say it's going to be plus, and it's going to be half the height. Because that's the amount of the space we're missing. Let's see about this, see if that works. Oh, maybe you guys are missing that image. Sorry, so if you were missing that earlier, you can see now it's dropping off. Or it might have been, my face might have been hiding that one before. Just in case, let me show this to you again. in case I was hiding it. Oh, I was dropping. Oh no, of course I was hiding it. All right, here we go. So we can see here that as it's dropping, as soon as it hits the bottom, as soon as the middle hits the bottom, it's going to reset. Is it working? It's pretty close. Okay. All right, so that's where I had to add this, increase this by 50, so it doesn't quite. That should be fine. I'm not sure why that's giving me an error. Yeah. Just go back over. Boom. There we go. All right. So that's that. I think that's a good place to start. That's some pretty big ideas in here that these variables are visible across the entire method. Excuse me. So these variables are viewable across the entire class. These things are called global variables. They are globally visible across the entire method.